as a scientist. So this paper's kind of come out of that, and if you pardon the pun, a gut feeling that I've had about films over the years. Okay, so starting off then, Alien and its sequels have been examined with multiple scholarly lenses, but it's perhaps Barbara Creed's association of the first film with the abject that is best known. And as is well documented, Creed identifies a range of consciously inscribed visual and narrative tropes in Alien reflecting the abject maternal body. And that's kind of what's talked about quite a lot. Yeah? This paper argues that while Alien is indisputably a cornerstone of feminist cinema, its abject aesthetics are also central to an ongoing bodily turn in visual culture through a concurrent, unconscious mediation of the post-1970s zeitgeist. I'm on the right slide, I've lost my place already. Okay, it is contended that the film and its sequels have two other important and related influences, namely developments in medical technology that increasingly rendered the interior body as accessible and visible and have arguably fostered such imagery. And second, the fact that various institutions in and outside of the UK, including that of medicine but not limited to it, have themselves been under the microscope. Even though it's not possible to unequivocally correlate a film's aesthetics with either generalised attitudes towards medicine or with broader cultural emotions, there is nonetheless a continuity between the onset of abject aesthetics in post-1970s film and the questioning of institutions such as medicine. A relationship is therefore proposed between Alien and its sequels as part of a continuum of visual culture and the ongoing dissection and subsequent transparency of public services and global institutions. In particular, the paper connects the recent history of medicine to depictions of the abject body. The main assertion is that the abject imagery of Alien may be viewed through the lens of a more expansive structure of feeling, emergent since the 1970s, but gathering momentum in recent decades, that reflects an opening up of society in all its visual, social, cultural and political configurations. Expressly, the materialisation of body imagery evident across all forms of culture parallels a change from a repressive, patriarchal society that constructed medicine as infallible and male doctors as omnipotent to one that is generally more liberated, transparent and equitable. While the trend towards displays of the interior body is informed by medical development since the 1970s, an inclination towards what Mark Seltzer describes as a wound culture, the public fascination with opened and torn bodies, changes in censorship and developments in medical film technology I've missed a bit there. Towards what Mark Seltzer describes as a wound culture, the public fascination with opened and torn bodies, has further engendered tropes of viscerality. It is at the intersection of this structure of feeling, wound culture, changes in censorship, and developments in medical film technology that this analysis is located. So, coming on to a structure of feeling, don't know how familiar you are with this, but it's a bit of a nebulous term, and it's coined by Williams. He describes a mood or way of thinking discernible retrospectively across the entire social, cultural and political spectrum at any given moment. So when you're in that structure of feeling, you don't know it. It's only when you look back, and as we look back towards the 1970s, it's kind of become quite clear to me. Ian Buchanan explains that a structure of feeling refers to the different ways of thinking vying to emerge at any one time in history. It appears in the gap between the official discourse of policy and regulations, the popular response to official discourse, and its appropriation in literary and other cultural texts. Williams uses the term feeling rather than thought to signal that what is at stake may not yet be articulated in a fully worked out form, but has rather to be inferred by reading between the lines. If the term is vague, it is because it is used to name something that can really only be regarded as a trajectory. Looking back, as first alluded to by Pete Voss in a 1986 screen special on body horror, the British-US landscape featured specifically a patriarchal system of medicine that embraced a club culture. And as I was just saying to someone, I could probably write a book separate on what happens in the NHS. And maybe I will one day. And gender disparity in terms of both pay and employment figures. The prominence of iatrogenic disease, so doctor-caused disease, for example, hepatitis C, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease from contaminated medical products, an emerging failure of medicine to combat infectious pathogens, HIV, later medical controversies such as the body parts scandal at Alderhay Hospital in the UK, and a change in the tide of public opinion, not only towards medicine, but also in recent times towards other entrenched institutions. You can think of many: Catholic Church, banking systems, the BBC, UK police forces, etc., etc. Just before I go any further, I just warn you there are images of corpses taken from, not photographs that I've done, but just in case you're likely to be disturbed by it. Okay, so alongside the probing of such institutions, a corresponding change has been inscribed onto the physical body in visual culture, with a particular focus on abject and previously concealed or taboo forms. Such instances of disgust are theorised by Julia Christova, who relates the abject predominantly to the feminine maternal body, an aspect which is readily typified by the numerous grotesque birth scenes in Alien and its sequels, but which isn't the main point here. Central to her theory is the maintenance of the body's physical and psychological integrity. And therefore, even though the aforementioned films involve abnormal birth, they are also abject because they involve bodily infiltration at both organ and cellular levels. One example of the breakdown of bodily integrity arises in the opening scenes of Alien Resurrection. Here the camera scans, and I just love these images, scans over a pulsating amorphous mass until a distorted single eye comes into view, followed by images of other organs embedded within it. Later in the film, extended pans languish over gigantic glass vessels containing fully grown experimental clones of protagonist Ellen Ripley. And those images, when I first started in the NHS, 1979, I was in a Victorian kind of infirmary, and there were jars and jars full of this sort of stuff, of malformed fetuses, body organs, etc. It's kind of really reminds me of that. Okay, so one obvious reason for this turn to graphic and visual body horror is an overall relaxation of censorship since the 60s. Refinements in technology may also influence such depictions, since digital imagery enables a more credible portrayal of genetically instigated monstrosity, and is evident in the previously noted opening sequence of Alien Resurrection. So, a further factor, as I said, is Mark Seltzer's concept of a wound culture, the public fascination with torn and open bodies. Typical examples of such wound culture range from medical dramas such as ER, bodies, cardiac arrest, to forensic crime dramas such as The Bridge and The Killing. The turn to corporeality further manifested in artworks during the period from the 1970s onwards. So this is Andrei Serrano's photographic series entitled The Morgue, and these are all images from that. And then you will have seen this probably in James Bond Casino Royale, if not firsthand, Von Hagen's Body Worlds exhibition, which featured plastinated cadavers, while 2002 saw the first public autopsy for 170 years. Recent incarnations of bodily explicitness may be seen in British reality, medical reality programming, for example, Embarrassing Bodies. Okay, clearly therefore, the turn to the abject that we witness in Alien is not merely a reflection of the isolated predilections of director, scriptwriter or set designer, nor is it solely indicative of developments in the horror genre or changes in censorship, but suggests a broader contextual paradigm. The influence of medicine is potentially twofold. First, a number of significant medical controversies began to emerge in the 70s that are ongoing. Currently it's the hepatitis to the blood contamination and the infection of haemophiliacs with diseases such as HIV, Hep C and B. AIDS is especially relevant to an argument for a revised structure of feeling developing in the 70s. Structure of feeling developing from the 70s because it embodied the crisis in Western medicine, which had previously kept major disease outbreaks under control, namely its failure to deal with new pathogens, and recently we've had Ebola, etc., MRSA. The failure began to confirm suspicions about the fallibility of medicine and contributed to an unfolding turnaround in public feeling about the medical profession. In the UK, there were numerous controversies, including the public inquiry into the Bristol baby heart scandal, when 2 surgeons caused the unnecessary deaths of 30 infants by continuing to operate on them despite an unacceptably high failure rate. And the body parts controversy at Alderhay Hospital in 1999, when body organs were harvested for research, partly for financial gain, and children's organs were sold for profit, basically. In addition, Susan Squire reports that an archive of human and fetal organs had been discovered at the Alderhay Hospital, including heart collection containing more than 2,000 hearts, a fetal collection containing around 1,500 fetuses, and an additional collection that by December 1999 had accumulated more than 445 partial or full fetal remains. Alderhay, as I said, wasn't the sole institution involved in organ storage. It was a widespread and accepted practice, and the above-mentioned scene of grotesque fetal mutations in Alien Resurrection recalls many of these freak show curiosities stored in pathology laboratories before there was a body parts embargo later in the 1990s. While the image of Ripley carrying the remains of Bishop in Alien 3, if you can remember, she kind of rescues the parts from a scrap heap and wraps it up, puts it over, echoes the theft of body parts by sculptor Anthony Kelly, who's stealing body parts for artistic purposes. Okay, so such incidents, and here's a few of the, such incidents prompted the regulation and move to transparency in medical institutions, along with the dismantling of hierarchies that had been previously male-dominated and patriarchal. Along with equal rights legislation, the overall effect was to reduce discrimination against women, ethnic minorities, and those with physical differences that had resulted from previous bias, cover-ups, and jobs for the boys. This scenario is one reflected throughout the Alien franchise, where differences of class, ethnicity, and physical aberration are foregrounded. And the second contribution to some of the imagery that we see in Alien is the advent of MRI and CT scanning during the 70s, along with more sophisticated endoscopes and of late self-monitoring devices that have had an equally profound impact on film aesthetics. Specifically, the ability to visualise the interior body as a kinetic, living entity rather than the fixed imagery of the X-ray seems relevant to the preoccupation with bodily interiors in all visual arts and media. So too has the Human Genome Project brought analysis of genetic matter to the forefront of societal consciousness. So, finally to Alien and its sequels. They're particularly central to an argument that the opening up of the body in visual culture ran parallel with the concurrent opening up of institutions in their focus on 2 key aspects: interiority and institutional corruption. The films are obsessed with interiors, from the aliens extending inner jaws, the to Kane's infiltration, the discarded outer skin of the alien, Kane's probing of the egg's interior, wherever it is, the close-up inspection of the face hugger, the crew's exploration of the corporeal innards of the alien spaceship, and the dissected interior of Ash, the android science officer. The preoccupation with interiority is established in the opening sequence. A subjective camera tracks towards a module containing the sleep pods and sweeps the spectator through its open cavity. Indeed, a common visual pattern of entering various portals persists, either as subjective camera or from the point of view of the crew members. This notion of going inside is not always set up in association with the shock tactics of horror, rather in association with looking inside, consistent with the approach of various artworks of the late 20th century, such as Damien Hirst's Mother and Child Divided, or Mona Hatian's Course Étranger. While there is a birthing connotation to the opening scene, there's also a medical implication, in that the crew have electrodes attached to them, and the setting is presented in a clinical mode. Similar associations occur in the medicalisation of the alien attacker on Kane. He's quarantined, there are references to the ship being infected, and he undergoes a whole body scan, so the interior body's visualised, making direct links to the development of CT scanning during the 70s. This is a trope echoed many times throughout the series, while during the later scenes the sound of heartbeats, as well as an electronic monitor that picks up the alien's presence, overlies the mise-en-scène. The alien detector sounds exactly like a heart monitor and correspondingly flatlines when a crew member is killed. Aside from the medical inferences, there are allusions to and criticism of institutions, and each film features a particular type of institution, such as the military, the prison, Discussion centres on inequality between the crew with comments about bonuses and shares, thereby implying the corporate sensibility of the operation. Moreover, malpractice of the corporation becomes evident in the fact that Ash, the corrupt android medical officer, breaks the rules on quarantine and deviates from procedure. Significant to a contention for a link between institutional corruption, medicine, and the physical body, this cover-up of the fact that the crew is expendable and the alien is wanted for military purposes is reflected in a physical concealment, in that it is revealed that Ash is an android. The sequels are further implicated in the bodily term, and while they maintain a focus on gender, especially issues of reproduction, they equally retain references to medicine and institutional politics. For example, in Alien 3, the setting is a double Y chromosome correctional facilities, inhabited, we learn, by rapists and child molesters. The preoccupation with interiorities here made evident in Ripley's insistence when finding Newt dead that we have to do an autopsy, I have to see inside of her. The concept of the alien as an infective agent is further promoted through reference to possible contagion and is described as an unwelcome virus, significant because media attention concerning HIV was at its height in the 1990s. The hierarchical structure, how am I doing for time, Sean? Am I 2 minutes? Okay, thank you. So I'm not going to finish that, I'll cut it short anyway. The hierarchical structure of institutional politics is also at play, and it is stated by Bishop that the quote, company knows everything that went on, whilst there is direct reference to the medical world and its failures. First, through dialogue of the prison medical officer, Dr. Clemens, who's played by Charles Dance, who confesses to Ripley that he is at the facility because he did a 36-hour shift in the ER, which was like, that's quite short to what actually went on. Then got drunk and was called back and prescribed the wrong dose of drugs, killing 11 patients. The trope of the CT scanner is again evident as Ripley self-scans and finds the alien embryo inside of her. Even though she attempts to destroy the alien by throwing herself into molten metal, her DNA is used in alien resurrection to reconstitute her in mutated form. At this time, the Human Genome Project was underway, while the film followed the successful cloning of Dolly the sheep a year previous. So I'll just try and tie this up then, talking about Prometheus, picks up on these genetic aspects. The opening sequences entailing via an extreme zoom into the alien's flesh, the microscopic disintegration of its DNA. This is visualised as a double-stranded helix, signalling medical developments in electron microscopy and genome sequencing. It also highlights a number of contemporaneous ethical concerns pertaining to human and animal experimentation within the real scientific world. Genetic profiling, artificial intelligence, end-of-life definitions, organ donation, animal primate experimentation, abortion, body part research, the ethics of creating, cloning and indefinitely preserving life, euthanasia and the unauthorised accessing of personal data. So I'm just going to whiz through some of these images to give you a flavour of what I mean. And then we've got that extreme close-up of the self-abortion. Okay, and to say in summary then, the abject visuals that emerged during the 1970s and persist to the present day bracket an era in which a structure of feeling concerned with the interrogation of discriminatory and other undesirable institutional practices intersected with the development of a wound culture. Such uncovering stemmed from radical political shifts and equal rights that occurred during the 1970s. In the course of the same period, AIDS became a prominent global threat and confirmed suspicions about the fallibility of medicine. Delayed action by governments, widespread inequalities in healthcare treatment and employment of medical professionals, together with an extensive catalogue of medical errors and controversies occurring in rapid succession, gave impetus to the need for change. The combination of these diverse factors has arguably engendered an increasingly abject aesthetic across arts, literature and film, the latter made possible because of a relaxation in film censorship. Such a visual style has become especially prominent in the science fiction and horror genres, and is particularly illustrated by the Alien franchise, which not only visually highlights medical technologies, but also points directly to corrupt institutions. Thank you.
Well, I was saying to Fran before, I've been sort of reading all of her work, and I kind of feel like the Padawan to her Jedi Master here. So I hope you're not going to be now disappointed by my presentation. My name is Sara Wheeler. I am a lecturer at Glyndŵr University in the psychology department. I also write a sort of little column in The Cloud, which is the Welsh medium newspaper, and I've been writing that for 10 years now, and that sort of mainly looks at films and things like that. So I'm also really quite a strange person, and a lot of my points of reference come from science fiction. And this is Delenn from Babylon 5. She makes a really nice quote in one of the episodes that Mbari believed that the universe broke itself into pieces trying to make sense of itself. And that stuck with me because I feel that that's what I'm constantly doing. I have Waardenburg syndrome, so in some ways I'm in fact abject. And I am constantly trying to make sense of myself within the universe. So most things are all about me. And that's what this presentation is mostly about. So I wanted to be a part of the Centre for Film, Television and Screen Studies. I've been involved since the beginning. I was here last year when there was the 2001 event. My husband gave a presentation. He's an evolutionary biologist. I was keen to present this year, and I was waiting to see what are they going to do it on, and then they said, oh, we're going to do it on the Alien film. So I was like, oh no, why are they doing that? This was my emotional response that I went through, like shock, and then oh god, and then oh, I'm so disappointed, because I hate those films. I'm not just not even completely a fan. People have been apologising since yesterday for not, I don't know all this nerdish detail around this because I'm not a massive fan. I'm not a fan at all, or at least I was at the beginning of this process. In fact, the steps that I've gone through to explore my feelings towards this film, I think it was a full-blown phobia, and I would say it meets all the criteria for. I switched them off when they come on telly, so my husband is a fan of the films, and he would like, oh, can we just have it on in the background? No, I don't want those films on in the background. I don't want that exploding goo and everything on the screen. When Prometheus came out, there was a big debate about whether we were going to go and see it, because he wanted to go and see it, and I really, really didn't, because I knew it was connected to the Alien film. So I was just thinking, oh, this is a big nightmare. But anyway, you know, I am I'm a sociologist or a transdisciplinary person, so my evolving emotional and cognitive responses to this as I mull through it, because I usually don't just have that response where I close my thoughts off. So I thought, yeah, okay, I hate those films, and I've had a negative somatic response, really quite a vicious one, but they are popular films, and other people don't respond negatively to them. There must be something, and so maybe it is actually time for some introspection and self-reflection with regards to my peculiarity. And this was actually quite pleasing. This was a good turning point, because it brought me back to my PhD research, which looked at medically unexplained symptoms in primary care and doctor-patient interaction around those things. And so basically, I was thinking about the fact that I have a very physical response to these films, and my PhD research looked at how people make sense of physical sensations and their sort of thought processes around assuming that they actually have some kind of infection or some kind of illness. When in fact, medically unexplained symptoms is a social and clinical predicament of not having any identified organic pathology, or to put it another way, if you have problems with your bowel, and they do all the tests for bowel cancer and such, and they get to the point where they think, okay, we've ruled out all of those really nasty things now, so we're going to call it irritable bowel syndrome. I'm going to treat it symptomatically, but there is, this crosses over into psychosocial research, and basically somatization is the physical manifestation of psychosocial distress. So it's the fight or flight response, and lots of the doctors, and they hadn't had training in doing this in terms of communication, so it's very interesting to think where that might have come from, because one of my supervisors was a primary care physician, but they went for this big cat theory. So they would say, you know, early man would be living in caves, and then a lion would come along, and you would have to prepare to fight the lion or to run away. And then the fight or flight response it generates adrenaline, and so your bowel will expel, because obviously it's going to be easier to run away and move around if you haven't got a full bowel. You begin sweating so that you're going to cool down, and all the sort of various other things that you think about when you feel really sort of stressed and anxious. And all of the different symptoms that go with that. If you are fighting or running away, they're helpful because they make you more agile and ready to go. If you're giving a presentation in this kind of environment, sweating isn't the thing to be doing. And having a dry mouth and feeling all shaky and over-aroused. And so this was very interesting to me because I realised I was a massive somatizer. So it was very therapeutic for me to go through that process. And this was actually a photograph that I took when I was in Zambia. That's just a fun fact. So I was thinking, well, that's the start that I'm coming from. It also means that I can use it without having to put like a horrible URL. And so it may seem a bit of a strange starting point, and I only realised this a little way in that I'd actually written this abstract and was going to present a paper at a conference that is celebrating these films, and I'm going to come in and be like, I'm the opposite, I despise them. But anyway, I was already involved now, so I sat down and I started thinking, so it's a bit of a sort of free association kind of process, writing down just the first words that came into my head. I got always accompanied by big pads of paper, and I just started writing down the things. I was thinking yuck, and goo, and mucus, and then you get to the sort of synonyms around disgust, so repugnant, repulsive, revolting, but also gratuitous. So I had kind of two things going on in my mind here. There was the obvious sort of viscosity, but then there was also the fact that I felt that it was in my face, and they were putting it in my face and it was unnecessary. And then I started, realised at this point that I was doing a subjective study, a study of my subjective disgust, mainly. And there's a really nice book here by Wilson, The Hydra's Tale. There's so many books, big, thick books with tiny writing, that are all about disgust, about this really sort of powerful response. This is really nice that he talks in here about the fact that the English language permits simple words to designate both physical and moral aberration. And that's really important because that's what I felt was going on here. I wasn't just having this sort of physical response of disgust. So the example he uses around moral is bigots. You meet bigots and you actually are disgusted by them. Not in a physical way, you're disgusted cognitively. They are disgusting. So the elasticity of disgust, basically he's talking here about the fact that we, in common sense view, we tend to assume that the same things that disgust us will disgust other people at the same level, but of course that's not the case. And he does talk here about disgust being hydrovarious. He has borrowed that from Salman Rushdie, which is a bit problematic for me because I'm very not okay with him. The context and stimuli and impact on emotional response. So this is very interesting then that he went on to sort of talk about how being involved in something like a golden shower it will provoke a very different, sorry that I have put that in your mind, that it would provoke a very different response to reading a story about it or seeing a ballet. Well, which it would, because if you think actually about A Clockwork Orange, there's violence in that film, but it's almost performed as a sort of ballet. So when I saw it, I was kind of a bit confused because I was thinking it doesn't really feel in the same way. It's not like a Vinnie Jones film or something, is it? So anyway, I digress. So this is a really nice book. I believe you are friends with her, or she's a colleague of yours, Rina Arya. She actually begins her book by talking about this art installation, Peabody. And actually I was disappointed when I brought up the image because when I was reading it, it sounded so beautiful and the perfect sort of situation around abject because of abjection, of it being sort of beautiful and yet vile at the same time. I thought those beads look a bit tacky for me. I thought they were going to have been placed in a sort of beautiful pattern. But anyway, she talks about the fact that this idea of a cycle of repulsion, attraction, fear and intrigue. And if you think really hard about even smells that you may find disgusting, they're also kind of attractive in some ways. There is a mention of it in Austin Powers, I think, something like that. And it's just really interesting because you think, well, you keep looking at it, even though you think, oh, and then keep looking at it. And that's actually quite true about sort of films like Alien, I think. So that actually leads us nicely into jouissance. I think that's how you pronounce it. Apologies to any French people in the room. I've only ever seen it written down. So of course we've heard about Julia Kristeva and how she kind of took Mary Douglas's idea of the abject and then moved on and brought psychoanalysis in to sort of talk about our sort of reactions. And in her book it's very interesting. She goes back to sort of Jacques Lacan's idea of jouissance. And that's what basically what I'm trying to say, but failing, is that we have that kind of almost enjoyment of that disgust, as I understand it. Lost my thread. She talks a lot about the borders between abjection is very much about us recognising. It begins with the archaic mother and this idea of when we recognise that we are separate, so we're a separate being, and identifying ourselves as being other to the things around us. So this idea of these borders. She says that abjection itself is a composite of judgment and effect, of condemnation and yearning, of signs and drives, which of course all the stuff around drives and psychoanalysis. My students have been having lots and lots of fun at my expense because the level 3s had just done Freud and sort of like basic psychoanalysis last semester, and then they met me this semester, and one of the first things I told them was about this presentation, and they're like, did this happen when you were young, and that sort of thing. So anyway, back to Alien. This is, of course, the most offensive, I think. Well, actually it isn't, because there's another scene where there's a chest burster and there's sort of fizzing and shaking, which I found even worse. But see, like I have been buying books and all sorts of things. If you go into my office now, I now look like the biggest fan of all of these films. So yeah, this John Hurt there would be Chestburster, which kind of looks a bit like a penis but with teeth. And there's the face hugger, obviously. That one I feel even more anxious about because it makes me feel like I'm suffocating, because that's the worst possible thing, isn't it, not being able to get air. This, you know, I don't understand why, Colin, why did he have white blood? why white blood?
No idea. Mechanics are, you lubricate a mechanical system with emulsions of oil.
But they're supposed to be human-like. But they're supposed to be human-like, and then if you prick them, they bleed white.
It signifies their difference from humans.
But the point in the films, they're supposed to be pretending to be humans.
Yes, but now we know that they're not when they bleed.
But they're contaminated humans.
But you see, that's a really good point then, because that sort of white goo does remind us of infection, I will argue. So
It's also much easier to film.
but it's really, really grim. That scene, the scene where the thing comes through his back and he kind of explodes. That was one of the images, because I was born in 1979, so these films have been like the background in my entire life. And that scene probably actually trump cards some of the other ones with the blood, because I don't have so much problem with blood as I do with goo. This scene I thought was completely unnecessary and didn't make any sense at all. We wake it up and there's all like, you know, the popping and the eye rolling and things. But actually, as we were discussing on Twitter, the actual xenomorph is quite visually stunning and quite beautiful, and sort of nice sleek lines and sort of no goo there. This from Geiger's book, so that drawing there, I don't find that horrific, but I do find the other one horrific. I don't like that.
Bacon image.
Huh?
You find the bacon image more.
That, yes, I find that kind of thing horrendous, whereas this is a monster, but I don't find it horrendous. So contrary am I. I actually quite liked these scenes, and this one would be the one where I would say that I had that kind of jouissance and abjection, because although of course they're monstrous and horrible, because I have a genetic condition and I'm very interested, I became very interested in genetics and experimentation and such in various other things that I do. That was actually probably the one where I did have that, can't watch, what to watch. So, and the hybrid, or I forget what it's actually called, but someone had it on a slide.
The newborn.
The what, sorry?
The newborn.
The newborn, that's it. So that's, again, very interesting. There's a kind of very touching moments in there. So now, going back to Christeva's abjection, one of the things that she does, she kind of leaves the archaic mother behind. She talks about abjection in everyday life. I had lots of fun staging all these photos, so I didn't have to take anything off the web. So she talks about, she was Bulgarian, and she was growing up in Bulgaria in the 40s, where I'm guessing they didn't have fridges, because she talks about how her family would give her a glass of milk, which is designed to be nutritious and it's going to be good for you, but if it was at sort of room temperature, and obviously not being in a fridge, it would begin to get that skin, which actually is at the point of whether you should or should not drink it, because of course milk has got lots of all kinds of nasty things in it once it gets to that stage, and can in fact contaminate you and make you very ill. I grew up in Wrexham in the 80s, so I didn't have that problem because our milk was kept in the fridge. But I do have a sense of objection to things like this, bits in butter. That sort of contamination. So that's my sort of everyday comparison with Christeva's very personal objection there. As I said before, I think part of my abjection, particularly to the sort of viscosity, is possibly because I have had very poor health and had lots of chest infections and things like that throughout my life, and therefore that sort of mucus and things, it does fill me with a sense of particular horror. And also then the sort of viscosity and the gratuitous nature, bringing that sense of disgust, the two-sided disgust, brings to me a sense of a breakdown of individual agency. I felt violated by by watching some of these things. I was like, why have these people done this? Why have they made these films? And I know that there's obviously lots of films now that make people faint, because they deliberately are making more and more shocking, but for some reason these films have actually disturbed my thought processes, which I realised as I was angrily writing about it and preparing for today. I realised that's a good thing, because it's disturbed my thought processes, which is always a good thing. A structure of feeling, obviously, as I've been stalking Fran over the web and I've been reading her work, I came to the structure of feeling that she was talking to us about before, from Raymond Williams's work. And it struck me as I was reading about it, I thought, oh, that's great, yeah, that sort of general mood that's out there and how that would influence what was going to be in films. And I was thinking, especially when I was reading about medicine, it really sort of echoes Foucault's idea of epistem. So, and I sort of Googled epistem and structure of feeling, as somebody else had pointed this out. So the idea that the epistem is that sort of framework for knowledge, our sort of fundamental assumptions about reality, the best possible knowledge that we have at any given time in medicine or in any other discipline, and how that is shaped. And then I think the mood, the general mood, and the structure of feeling sits quite nicely then within that, because of course we don't always stick to whatever the general knowledge is. Complementary medicine is a really nice example of that, how we negotiate all those different things. What was I going to say here? Yeah, so this is just alluding to the fact that I've taken this from Fran's work and doffing my hat. And I'm thinking of things that I would probably add, thinking about growing up in the 80s, is the sort of other things that were a structure of feeling at the time. Obviously Margaret Thatcher came to power the year that I was born. That's John Nash there, who talked about game theory and how rapidly that spread in terms of explaining human behaviour, trying to manipulate human behaviour. Machiavellianism, I'm a massive fan of Dallas, and I'm now beginning to think I need to be more JR about things. And this is James Buchanan, who was also involved in the sort of writing about personal choice and how you can sort of sway that to advantage. I was also another sort of very big film genre at this time, growing alongside in real life, was the sort of martial arts and boxing films. And I was massively into these because I was massively into boxing and martial arts. And I actually weirdly didn't feel this was gendered, because I just didn't see a difference between me and Djokovic Van Dam. And I took part in one particular tournament where it was very mixed. There was boxers, there was kung fu people. I did kung fu more than kickboxing. And this girl was more of a boxer, and she smacked me in the face, and my nose exploded all over the canvas. And this is really to sort of give you this impression, really make you understand, I'm not a squeamish person. I have no problem with blood, even if it's my own splattered all over the canvas, because my response was like a sort of, let me at it, let me get back at it. I'm a massive fan of the Rocky films, and these films and the kickboxer and blood sport and such, they really have that kind of very visceral quality, the blood and the sweat. If you've ever been in that sort of gym and training in that environment, there's a very particular kind of smell that goes with all that adrenaline. And you can almost smell it when you're watching these sorts of films. Your muscles burning from doing too much activity, really, that arousal and tension, the contact and the pain and the stinging pain, and that sort of catharsis and euphoria that you gain from doing those things and also from seeing them on film. So I'm guessing I'm starting leaning towards that sort of thinking. And you're figuratively fighting. So you are in fact fighting or not fleeing. You're getting rid of all of that energy in the appropriate manner. I don't have any problem with zombie decapitation and shooting and this kind of thing, because it's a very clean quality. But I did have a very visceral reaction to one of the early episodes, the one where he's in the tank, because I think they've shot it so well, and you really feel that you're in the tank. And I was kind of really getting I was like screaming and getting really very anxious for this person, because it felt so real, the threat. So I guess I have a sort of personal continuum. Violence and death I'm okay with. I'm not a death denier, I don't mind seeing death. Viscerality and bodily deterioration, not so much, not so keen on that. I'd rather be like just watching violence and death. Viscosity is the problem that I have. Isn't the film or me? I don't like being left out of things, and I like coming to things like this. There's lots of fans, and I especially love all the presentations of the books and all the associated franchise and things. Altering subjective disgust, Wilson points out here, of course, it's never a stable thing. It alters from culture to culture, time to time, within a culture, and an individual person can pass through many phases. And you can, psychology, we know we can alter behaviour. And this is a particular interesting one. I don't know why that's become pink, but in Cregan's book on the sociology of the body, she talks about expelling mucus in everyday life. And I actually did see an example of this. I saw someone in the toilets with her little son, and she was just using her fingers with no tissue to get him. He was blowing, and she was putting it straight down the sink. And at first I was like, oh! And then when I read this, I realised, I was thinking about it, yeah, is that any more disgusting than having a handkerchief? Ugh. So, other people's responses to the film, I met a guy at uni who had a xenomorph tattoo, and he was really very gentle person. He was very sweet, a nice person, so I was quite perplexed by that. In Comic-Cons and sci-fi events, you see people in the full costume, and they must love it. And then I went to Forbidden Planet with one of my friends recently, and I was looking at the various products. They sell all kinds of things, and there's new films all the time. And then I saw these, and at this point I was still quite angry with these films. So I was like, really? You can get battle-damaged xenomorphs with the goo coming out of them? And then I bought some, because I thought, well, I need to prepare for my conference so I can take photographs of them and things. And then I didn't want to open the packets because I wanted to keep them in the packets. And I was thinking, something's going on there. So I think I'm becoming very much desensitized, and I'm actually enjoying that experience. You can also buy lunch boxes with the egg that never was from earlier, and I really want one of those. You get a Nostromo t-shirt, which starts me thinking of a whole onomastics debate. And you can get a t-shirt with a xenomorph fetus growing inside the wearer. And weirdly, I want one of them as well. And then I realised a couple of days ago, when I was trying to pull all this together, one of my friends sent me my abstract, and he'd said, sociologically, the only thing I would add is, what are you adding to abjection? And that had been gnawing at me, and I was thinking, I really just don't know. And then I realised what I had done is slowed right down and engaged with all the products in the films, and watched the films back to back. And it's desensitized me. But also it could be seen as a study in mindfulness. So learning how to respond to my thoughts and feelings in a different way, and adapting them, adapting difficult or unhelpful thoughts. So it's actually been a whole experimentation in mindfulness, which is kind of nice. So taking things forward, more of the same. And so my contribution to the wider field, therefore, would be a kind of well-being angle, really, in that my little case study, or if I can write this up in some way, it's certainly going to be helpful for me going forward, because maybe I can address other issues that I have, all my other various kinds of phobias and maladaptive behaviour. And this can help me to go forward and have a happier life.